Disclaimer. This video's information is being provided for informational, educational, and general interest purposes only. The information in this video is not intended to shock, enrage, or otherwise provoke the viewer. The sole purpose of this video was to raise awareness of true crime-related events. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
The wrongful death trial started today involving a horrific case of abuse and the death of a 5-year-old developmentally disabled Cleveland boy.
5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez was a vulnerable boy who clearly needed help.
Jury selection began in the wrongful death trial filed against Jordan's mother, Larissa Rodriguez, her boyfriend, and Nancy Caraballo.
What's your emergency?
The wrongful death trial started today involving a horrific case of abuse and the death of a 5-year-old developmentally disabled Cleveland boy back in 2017. Investigators say that's when Jordan's mother and her boyfriend admitted they buried his body in the backyard of their Cleveland home. The couple pleaded guilty to the abuse and death of the little boy. Investigators also charged the Catholic Charities social worker who was hired to watch over Jordan and make sure he was safe.
Instead, police say she was forging reports and buying food stamps from Jordan's mother illegally. 19 investigator Mike Mason has the latest.
5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez was a vulnerable boy who clearly needed help. Reports show he was not only physically abused, but he was malnourished, only weighing 15 pounds at the time of his death. He was also nonverbal. Now the attorney representing his estate hopes this trial will speak out on his behalf, sending a strong message to Catholic Charities.
Jury selection began in the wrongful death trial filed against Jordan's mother, Larissa Rodriguez, her boyfriend, and Nancy Caraballo. Caraballo is the Catholic Charities social worker who was hired to do welfare checks on Jordan.
Catholic Charities had a contract to provide services to that family.
Attorney J. Paul Deratani represents Jordan's estate. 5 years ago, he filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which is now going to trial. This all stems from a horrific case of abuse back in 2017. Deratani says there were at least 13 cases of abuse and neglect involving Jordan that Catholic Charities and Caraballo should have known about. He says Caraballo failed to do her job. According to reports, Rodriguez and her boyfriend were abusing Jordan so badly that he became unconscious and eventually died.
Multiple fractured ribs and a fractured wrist. So, that's pretty big evidence that there was abuse going on in that home. And for them not to be in the home, because I believe had they been in the home, they would have seen evidence of abuse and certainly evidence of starvation.
Investigators say the couple then stuffed Jordan's little body into garbage bags and buried him in the backyard of their Cleveland home. The couple pled guilty to charges of manslaughter, felonious assault, and abuse of a corpse. They're both serving prison sentences of at least 25 years. Plus, investigators say Caraballo was involved in a scheme to buy food stamps from Jordan's mother illegally. They say she also falsified reports claiming she did welfare checks on Jordan, even though she didn't. Caraballo pled guilty to those charges. Deratani hopes jurors will send a strong message to Catholic Charities.
I hope what this case does is send a signal that Catholic Charities needs to clean up their act, and they need to hopefully restructure things so that other children don't get hurt.
The trial could last 2 or 3 weeks, but Deratani says he thinks it'll be wrapped up sooner than that. We'll of course let you know. Reporting from the Justice Center, Mike Mason, 19 News.
Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court opened jury selection for the wrongful death trial involving the horrifying mistreatment and demise of a Cleveland boy with developmental disabilities who was 5 years old. Investigators claim that in 2017, Jordan Rodriguez's mother Larissa Rodriguez and her boyfriend Christopher Rodriguez buried him in the backyard of their Cleveland home. 5 years ago, a wrongful death lawsuit was brought against the couple and Nancy Caraballo, the social worker employed by Catholic Charities Corporation to investigate Jordan's welfare. The boy's abuse and death were previously admitted to by the couple, and Caraballo, who was responsible for Jordan's well-being, was also charged by the authorities. Police claim that Caraballo was actually purchasing food stamps illegally from Jordan's mother in addition to fabricating reports about welfare visits that she never made. Duratney stated Catholic Charities had a contract to provide services to that family. Jordan's estate administrator, Michelle Rodriguez, is represented by Chicago-based lawyer J. Paul Duratney. Jordan was a vulnerable 5-year-old who obviously needed assistance, according to him. Not only was he physically mistreated, but reports also indicate that he was severely undernourished. Jordan was a special needs child who was considered nonverbal and had several health issues that needed ongoing care. Duratney claims that Caraballo and Catholic Charities ought to have been aware of the minimum of 13 instances of abuse and neglect that involved Jordan. He claims that as a result of Caraballo's negligence, Catholic Charities ought to bear some of the blame. Jordan reportedly suffered such severe abuse at the hands of Rodriguez and her boyfriend that he passed out. Investigators concluded that the young boy passed away because the couple decided not to seek medical assistance. Duratney also believes that if Caraballo had just gone to the house and reported these abuse indicators, she could have been able to step in and help. Jordan was only 15 pounds when he died, according to investigators, so she should have known he needed medical attention. Multiple fractured ribs and a fractured wrist, so, that's pretty big evidence that there was abuse going on in that home, said Duratney. And for them not to be in the home, because I believe if they had been in that home they would have seen evidence of abuse and certainly evidence of starvation. The couple, according to investigators, then buried Jordan in the backyard of their Cleveland home on West 80th Street after stuffing his tiny body into trash bags. The charges of involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, endangering children, and gross abuse of a corpse were accepted by the couple as a confession. Both of them are serving minimum 25-year prison terms. Furthermore, Caraballo was allegedly a part of an illegal food stamp scheme run by Jordan's mother, according to investigators. They also alleged that she fabricated reports saying she had checked Jordan's welfare when in fact she hadn't. Caraballo entered a guilty plea to those counts. Duratney is hoping jurors will demand that Catholic Charities be held responsible for failing to protect Jordan, a boy without a voice, and speak up for him. My hope is that this case will serve as a wake-up call for Catholic Charities to improve their practices and possibly reorganize their operations to prevent harm to other children, Duratney stated.
Statements today in the wrongful death trial of 5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez. The little boy suffered horrific abuse before he died and was buried in a backyard. Now, the caseworker assigned to protect him is accused of turning a blind eye to that abuse. 19 Investigates' Mike Mason is live at the Justice Center, downtown Cleveland, with the very latest. Mike.
Yeah, both sides presenting compelling opening statements in court today. The attorney representing Jordan's estate, J. Paul Duratney, made a case that Catholic Charities should have known about the abuse, especially since there were so many allegations filed. But the attorney representing Catholic Charities, Tom Mannion, said that the caseworker wasn't aware of Jordan's condition. He said that Jordan's mother and her boyfriend are really to blame. In opening statements, the attorney for Jordan's estate made a case that the Catholic Charities social worker assigned to protect Jordan, Nancy Caraballo, was friends with Jordan's mother, Larissa Rodriguez. He said they knew each other for 13 years prior to his death, and this clouded her judgment in Jordan's case. Larissa and her boyfriend, Christopher Rodriguez, pled guilty to the abuse and death of Jordan, plus investigators also charged Caraballo for forging records. Police say Caraballo not only lied about welfare visits she never made, but was also buying food stamps from Jordan's mother illegally. According to Duratney, Caraballo claimed to have made 97 welfare checks on Jordan, but only performed 43 of them. He says Caraballo's supervisors also never made the effort to visit Jordan's home. Meanwhile, he had been buried in his backyard for 3 months while Caraballo continued filing reports that the family was okay. Therefore, Deritani says Caraballo failed to do her job and Catholic Charities Corporation should be held responsible.
Yes, we will ask you to award substantial damages for the pain and suffering of this child that walked around with a broken ulna for 3 to 6 months, or even weeks, if you want to believe they're expert, weeks to months. A child who had broken ribs down his right side. The anguish of the brothers and sisters losing a brother from starvation. Kids that are going to come in from all places all over and are separated from each other. Because no child born into poverty with disabilities, born with bad parents, no child who's disabled and had food allergies should die of starvation and abuse in America because a private corporation that agreed to provide the services failed to go to the home, failed to supervise their employees, failed to have the policies.
Let him finish.
Involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, endangering children, gross abuse of a corpse, 25 years in prison. If it was me, I would have given her 1,000. If it was my wife, she probably would have given her 2,000. And Chris Rodriguez, this is when it started happening. Chris Rodriguez, the fall of 2016, things are good. We see in May that he's very nourished. After the fall of 2016, I don't know when it started happening. We know in January of 17 there was still food in the house and DCFS was there. And the other kids looked good. They didn't look for Jordan. Something was going on with Chris. He got 28 years. I'd give him 28,000 years. This is unbelievable.
And there's a long list of witnesses in this trial. Judge Mooney told me today that it will probably end up lasting about 3 weeks. Reporting live from the Justice Center in downtown Cleveland, Mike Mason, 19 News.
May it please the court, counsel, Ms. Rodriguez. It may please you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good afternoon, first of all. I know it's been a long day already. This is the 4th day of trial. You haven't heard evidence yet. But what you have heard is how horrific this was. What happened to Jordan Rodriguez in the spring and the summer of 2017 was absolutely the worst thing that you can imagine for a young child. And in those last 24 hours, we may never know exactly what happened. Larissa blames Chris blames Larissa, all sorts of things are being said. But what we do know is that in those last 24 hours, when they found Jordan unresponsive, he was still semi-conscious. And whether it was an arrhythmia, whether it was electrolytes, nobody will ever be able to know exactly. But what they do know, what the experts agree, is that if they had taken some action and done anything, got an ambulance there, got paramedics there, got him to the hospital, Jordan Rodriguez would be here. Instead, Larissa sets him on the bed and leaves him lay there. Chris Rodriguez walks into the garage, or after he gets his paycheck from the liquor store, walks into the garage, picks up a shovel, and while Larissa is ignoring her child, and while Jordan is laying on that bed dying, he starts digging and digging. They say he spends quite a bit of time out in the backyard digging Jordan's grave. And just like they hid and lied about everything they had been doing to him for the months prior to that, they then hid and lied about his death. They buried him in the backyard and continued to tell everybody, just like they had been doing. He was with his father. He was with his aunt. He was with a relative. What happened to Jordan Rodriguez should never happen. Not here, not to anyone. Developmental disabilities, no developmental disabilities, 4 years old, 15 years old. This should never happen. In this case, is about the two monsters that caused this, the acts that they did to cover this up, both beforehand and afterwards. This case isn't about Catholics or how big the corporation is, which I will take it as an honest misstatement, talking about the whole nation. That's not accurate. Catholic Charities involves 8 counties here. That's the defendant in this case. But it's not about charities either. It's not about the 400,000 people a year that Catholic Charities services. That has nothing to do with the case either. This case also, as you'll find out, has zero to do with nutritional counseling. You don't need nutritional counseling to tell you not to stuff socks down your 4-year-old's throat because you're mad at them or because you don't want people to hear them while you're hiding them upstairs, hid in the closet. This isn't about lack of food. There was ample food in that case. There's one note, and we'll look at the full note about low healthy food there, but there were ample notes about all the food that was in that house. And guess what? All the kids after this, none of them were malnutritioned. You don't need nutritional counseling to tell you to not intentionally starve your kid, to punish him by not giving him food, by getting mad at him and shoving socks down his throat and diapers over his head, in line to anyone and everyone about where he is and how he is. DCFS didn't know this was happening. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District and Metro Health Medical Center didn't know this was happening. Nancy Caraballo didn't know this was happening. Catholic Charities didn't know this was happening. The Cleveland Police Department didn't know this was happening. That little boy, lost my clicker. That little boy that Mr. Derricani talked about in May of 16, in the fall of 16, who was a happy boy playing with his brothers and sisters, clearly not malnourished. That's the boy that Nancy Caraballo last saw. That's who she last saw. It was horrible. It was horrible. How did we get from here and here to here? That's what this case is about. What happened in the spring and summer of 2017? What type of monsters could have done this? And now they want to come in and blame Nancy Caraballo somehow for this, or Catholic Charities. You know, after this happened, and they found out about it, the coroner got the body finally. Homicide by unspecified means. Why couldn't the coroner even tell what the exact cause of death was? Because he had been in there so long. It might have been as early as July of 2017. For months and months, and the body was decomposing. There was a radiology report because they were looking for evidence of malnutrition. They found no radiographic evidence of malnutrition, but nobody's going to get up here and tell you that this kid had full nutrition. Not with what these two were doing. There's two people who caused this. There are two people who are responsible for this. And I heard over and over again in opening statement that this is civil court. That doesn't mean you don't look at Larissa and Chris. You're going to have to go back and make a decision. Who was Jordan Rodriguez? How did he die? And who caused it? And I'm telling you, If you put DCFS or anybody else on that line as causing this, you're letting Larissa, I've heard it pronounced both ways, and Chris Rodriguez off the hook. Don't let them sit in prison and think that they're not responsible for this. They were charged with murder. Now, they eventually pled, they eventually admitted to some things, although we'll never get the full story. Involuntary manslaughter. That is the knowing killing of another person by committing a felony. They knowingly killed him, and they've admitted to that. You can't get away from that fact. Cannot get away from that. Both of them. Felonious assault on Jordan, endangering him, and gross abuse of a corpse. I read that they even dug up one of the dogs they had buried and put it on top of him in that grave. What kind of person does that? Ever since Chris Rodriguez got into her life, Larissa's, things started to go downhill, but she can't just blame Chris. She's the mom. They both had a responsibility to this child. Don't let them off that responsibility here. So how did it get to this point? Well, Larissa blamed Christopher when the cops found, Chris, and you'll see these documents. Christopher blames Larissa. Before I get to this slide, what's interesting is after Jordan was found, full investigation, autopsy done, huge investigation by the Cleveland Police Department. DCFS looks into it. The children are taken to other homes. The state of Ohio didn't come in and say, hey, Catholic Charities for Nancy Caraballo did something wrong and caused this. DCFS didn't say that. The Cleveland Police Department didn't say that. It wasn't the Cleveland Metropolitan School District or Metro Health Medical Center or anybody else. It was two people. Believe me, if they thought there was criminal liability for anybody else, they would have found it. Nancy Caraballo was committing food stamp fraud. The minute we found out, we fired her. That is horrible to do. Is it done in those communities sometimes? It is. That doesn't justify it. And she went to jail for it, as she should. And I'm not going to defend Nancy Caraballo, but she didn't cause Jordan Rodriguez's death. The last Jordan Rodriguez that she saw was happy and healthy. And you've been told all this stuff because I'll tell you, another thing this case is not about is just saying things. You need evidence. It's not about who talks the loudest or who gets you the most emotional or who says things, just says things. Like trying to act like Nancy Caraballo was a social worker or should have been. That's not accurate. Actually, the Cuyahoga County is the one who decides what qualifications they need as this parent-educator role. They decide what services are needed. Jordan Rodriguez was never in our service because we weren't even qualified as parent educators to handle him. He had an entirely different service. Interestingly, even after this occurred, Michelle Rodriguez didn't blame. She knew Nancy. She didn't blame Nancy. She didn't blame Catholic Charities. She was on the news blaming Ohio Department of Children and Family Services. Now, one of the things that I read during this case too, which was just horrible, Larissa even tries to blame Jordan himself. He just stopped eating. Let that sink in for a second. She blamed Jordan? And now I heard a new one today that maybe it's Larissa's mental illness. Now, she had anxiety and depression and saw a counselor, and DCFS got those records throughout the years to look at those. It doesn't mean you go out and you kill your son and you let him be buried and you stuff socks down his throat. We haven't had one record in this case that says she had some type of mental disability. Obviously, you don't do this unless you're depraved. But I'll tell you one thing about Larissa. She's smart. She's cunning. She's sly. And she had everybody fooled. Now, some of the family members knew some things were going on. Some of the friends had some suspicions, even though she told them that Jordan wasn't there. One of the friends snuck upstairs. That was the Karen Custer. And that's when she saw Jordan in July of 17 laying there that day. And she did nothing. Jacob Wagner, he did nothing. Those two didn't blame Nancy Caraballo or Catholic Charities. In October of 2017, Chris Rodriguez called his brother up, or his brother called him, and Chris said, "Scott, I have to tell you something. I wanted to tell you when you were here in July, but Larissa was always around." And he told him that Jordan was buried in the backyard. He wanted to tell him that in July. But quite frankly, whether it was July or September, who cares? It doesn't make any difference in this case to how horrible this was and who caused it. Chris and Larissa Rodriguez. How, and why are they trying to blame everyone else but those two? Because at the end of the day, you have to decide what percentage of fault between everybody. How do you not put 100% on Chris and Larissa? But if you're going to go that way and you want to look at if anybody's at fault, let's take a look at what really happened. You weren't told the story about this family and how DCFS was involved, or how early intervention was involved, or really how anything was involved. This case isn't about whether our expert looked at all the records. She didn't need to look at any records. If Nancy Caraballo saw abuse, even though technically she may not be as a parent educator or mandatory reporter, we don't care. We train all of our people to be mandatory reporters. If she saw something, she should have said something. This is the kid that she saw. So we didn't need to get an expert to say, oh, our expert agrees. If Nancy saw something, she should report it. Absolutely. Just as any human should, but just as DCFS and police and teachers and physical therapists and doctors and everybody else should. But they were good at hiding this. Look at how many contacts were made between 2013, and remember that Jordan was born in November 2012. The blue are the Cleveland Police Department. The yellow is Department of Children and Family Services. The green is Metro Health. And we have early intervention in purple. They literally fooled everybody. Everybody. Now, there are a couple notes about Jordan throughout the years. And plaintiff's counsel said, why do you have a note if he's not your client? Early intervention had notes about the other kids too. It's just Jordan happened to be there on certain visits. Jordan was not in our program. Central Intake is a county organization. And I'm going to flip to the slide real quick so you can see it, and then I'll go back to explain this. Cuyahoga County has Help Me Grow of Cuyahoga County, now known as Great Beginnings. And it's a county agency. It's not us. What they do, and there's a nationwide curriculum. This is something that they have that helps get services to families in need. And there's all sorts of different services. One of those services is Parents as Teachers, which is a program they contracted with us for some families. They contracted with Spanish American Committee as well to do that. By the way, Nancy didn't leave there and bring her clients. No, Cuyahoga County terminated their contract with Spanish America. They also contracted with Ohio Guidestone, Friendly Inn Settlement, and Catholic Charities in this area to provide them services, and you'll learn about those. Jordan didn't even qualify to be in this program because of his developmental disabilities. What he did qualify for was early intervention, run by an entirely different agency. And again, we'll get more into that. I wanted to explain that before I talk about this next slide. That central intake from the county never once assigned Jordan to any Catholic Charities program, nor did Catholic Charities assign him to any program. In fact, it would have been negligent to do so. You don't send a high school educated person to take care of somebody with developmental disabilities and medical problems. But you also don't deprive healthy kids of a parent educator. You give him the right help, and that is the county's job, and they did. They got early intervention involved. He was never enrolled in our program. Nancy was never his parent educator. She was never his social worker. She's not a social worker. You'll hear people throw words around like she was his caseworker. It's just not true. I mean, it's just not accurate. She last saw Jordan in the fall of 2016. She went to the house to conduct one of her parents' teacher's visits. And by the way, you don't have to do it at the house. On the form, you could do it at a school, you could do it in a park, you could do it at a restaurant. And you give counseling and tips. She would give things on how to get kids to stop sucking their thumb, how to get kids more engaged. This is for 0 to 3-year-old children. She did not interact with Jordan or notice anything about his appearance or health. After fall of 2016, when she last saw him, he was playing downstairs with his siblings, Tatiana and Anthony. They want to say that Karen Custer, at least she went upstairs. Nancy Carapalo had no authority. 0. This is a voluntary program. The way I like to say it is if DCFS comes to your home and you won't let them go look for your kids, DCFS will call the police. Well, if Nancy starts looking for kids, they could call the police on her. She has 0 power there. She's there to provide some education. So what happens is to cover this up and what was happening. In September 2016, Larissa tells the Cleveland Metropolitan School District that Jordan is in Texas. This is a form. Once Jordan was out of early intervention, and he had physical therapists and all those people, and Larissa did not really comply too well with it. But finally, they got him over to the Cleveland Metropolitan School District when he was 4, and he was going to start in the school system. He'd been evaluated for it. And then she calls up and stops him. Why? What's the reason? And they had done an individualized education program for him already. This has nothing to do with Catholic Charities. What's the reason? New school, Texas, Houston. That was her lie to the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. In December 2016, DCFS is out there at the home. Jordan with Dad. Jordan Rodriguez, and they have his birthday there. Jordan with Dad. They told DCFS he had moved out. Social worker visited the home on December 21st, 2016. And no matter how much screaming and yelling there is, you can't transform a parent educator into a social worker. If so, then there is no parent as teachers program anymore. You don't send a high school graduate out to take care of people that need a social worker. You don't do it. That was the county's decision on what the other children in the home needed. And what Jordan needed, they decided also. And that was early intervention. And that was people with more advanced degrees and more training. What do they see in December 2016? The people that are trained and have the authority to investigate and look. Home was clean, appropriate, adequate furnishings, working utilities, and ample food supply. I'm glad Nancy Carabello went to jail for food stamp fraud because it's illegal. and it is against the law. And she'd been buying them before this. That had nothing to do. She was giving Larissa money. And Larissa, by the way, who was still getting Jordan $700 or $800 a month SSI even after he died. Every time DCFS went there, there was ample food supply. In January of 17, when DCFS was out there again, they didn't even talk about Jordan because they thought that he was with his father. But again, people were appropriately dressed, and ample food supply. Talks about what the kids are doing and they're playing. And even as January of 17, despite all the craziness that might be happening and all the problems with these two, and it is bizarre. You will see even after they blame each other for this murder, they're sending 20-page love letters to each other. It's unbelievable. The spring of 2017, Larissa tells Nancy, Jordan moved away. She said, hey, I haven't seen him for a couple months. Now, one thing that you will hear from experts is that when Nancy went in that home, she gave educational things out and would look at the kids who were in the program. She had no power, authority, or duty to go search the house for everybody. If she saw him, and if she saw abuse, she would have. But we do know in January 17, she certainly wouldn't have seen it. And what did she say? Where's Jordan? Oh, he's not living here, is what Larissa said. Somebody's caring for Jordan. July of 17, Larissa tells Karen Custer, Jordan's in Texas with his aunt or grandmother. Karen Custer, I believe, is the last person other than perhaps family to have seen Jordan alive. December 2017, when Jordan is buried in the backyard, Jacob Wagner, father of one of Jordan's siblings, told him, he's in his room playing right now. Even when even when the police showed up at her house in December, listen to Larissa.
Do you have a child with special needs?
Oh, Jordan? Yes, I do.
How old is Jordan?
Jordan is just turned 5.
Where's Jordan?
He's with his dad. He's visiting with me. He's with me on holiday. He's not here with us right now. We're not here for the holiday.
Where's Dad?
In Texas. He's not even here. Is that who you guys are listening
No, maybe possibly.
What was the call maybe about?
Just checking the welfare.
No. I get these all the time because I got 8 year olds who want to sit there and call.
Do you know, what's his dad's name? George.
Patrick. Pat.
Do you have a number to Patrick? Can you reach that?
Yeah. What it is.
Sure, or you can tell me.
Look, I already know.
Firstborn, all the way down the line. Supposedly, Jordan was with Dad.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, we call him. Yes.
Right now, I don't have the number. It's just a little number.
She will lie to anyone. She will lie to you. She will lie to the judge. She will lie to the police. She lied to Nancy Caraballo. She will lie to everyone. And so will Chris. You know the interesting thing, though? Even Nancy Caraballo never blamed, even Larissa Rodriguez never blamed Nancy Caraballo or Catholic Cherokees. All these times, all these interviews, all this that came up, until after there was a lawsuit. And she met with some of the attorneys that were going to bring the lawsuit.
Objection.
It's timing, Your Honor.
Oh, I don't think so.
Thank you. And then the story changed. And we heard about DCFS is not a defendant, but let's be clear about this, because Larissa was a defendant in this case. Christopher was a defendant in this case. Tom Wetzel and Portia Maynor of Educational Services were defendants in this case. Metro Health was a defendant in this case. Dr. Aaron Wolf, Dr. David Ron, various John Does in case they found somebody else. Bright Beginnings, which was the Help Me Grow successor, nothing to do with Catholic Charities, and again, Portia Maynor. So,
Objection. Summary judgment motions.
excuse me, Your Honor, no speaking objection.
Go ahead, we proceed.
Thank you. So, when you were told that there was a reason somebody wasn't sued, they decide who's sued, not us. Not us. So we talked about this a little bit, and we know that parents as teachers did provide services for Milton, Anthony, Tatiana, and Mia. Some of it was back when Spanish America ran the group. And then around July of 2013, after they were fired from the county, Catholic Charities took over for those kids that were still enrolled in the program. Early intervention was what worked with Jordan. Now let's take a look at the Parents as Teachers program. It's for children ages 0 to 3. They provide handouts. They help mothers with services. They talk to moms. They help with resources. They can't remove the children from the home. They have absolutely no authority. Completely voluntary program. You will see all the enrollment forms. Of course we have the name families in some of our things. Anytime that you have a guardian and a child enrolled, that's a family. And no, we don't ignore somebody if we see something going on. But these are the enrolled children. No enrollment form for Jordan because he wasn't in the program and wasn't qualified for it. Saying that we somehow didn't hire Nancy Carabello right, I will tell you this, that after this happened, we called up all the families, of course, and every single one of them was happy with her. She did some bad things, and that credit, or the food stamp fraud, there's no defense to that. She shouldn't have done that. That didn't cause Jordan's death. You can't hold Catholic Charities responsible for, number one, something Nancy Carabello did outside the course and scope of her employment. But two, it didn't cause this. This wasn't from a lack of food. And she had 16 years doing this. 16 years. The only requirement that the Cuyahoga County put on this, and they provided a lot of the training too, was the minimum qualifications are a high school diploma or GED and 2 years previous supervised work experience with young children and or parents. She had 16 years. She completed all the training from Help Me Grow through the county. And these are the types of things she would get. And by the way, she had glowing recommendations from 2 different places. Handouts given, setting routines for home with children. Learning to use the toilet. What to do when no is your kid's favorite word. Interacting with your growing, changing child. Floor time is fun time. The day we stayed indoors. Fitting in a fitness routine for the parent. How do you do that when you have 0 to 3-year-olds? What do you do when you're going to school? Avoiding food fights. My daily food plan. And there was some nutritional things that were given. Tips for making meal times pleasant. Coping with stress. Exploring music. Tips for better brushing of your teeth. It's not fair to hold a parent educator responsible as if they were DCFS. They're not. They are not. There was a program for Jordan. It was called Early Intervention. They had service coordinators, they had social workers, they had a team of therapists and specialists, no relation to Catholic Charities. You'll see the enrollment forms and the dates that he was in this. He was assigned a team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working on his team. Larissa helped complete the individualized
Sorry, Tom, I didn't hear you. Larissa? I didn't understand.
helped to complete the individualized family service plan with early intervention. Here's a list of the caseworkers, the dates they were signed, and how long they were on it. They visited regularly. Here's some of the enrollments. Then she eventually refused services, and then she would lie. She'd say, I'm going to the school, but then she would tell the school he moved. Here's some of the dates of early intervention, and we're not going to get through all these right now. I'm going to go through them really quick here. But these are some of the people that are visiting the home. 14 visits or reports made about the family in 2014. These are for Jordan specifically. They're his client. 20 visits between 2013 and 17. Would have been more if Larissa had cooperated. The Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disability, 2015, they were administering this program. What do we have? Intake visits, 12 contacts throughout the year, 29 visits, attempted visits or contacts made in 2013 and 15. Now we get to DCFS. And I guess the claim is somehow if we would have called, even though she was hiding this child, because the last we saw him, he was happy, and DCFS was out at that home after that time period. They were out there in December, they were out there in January. This was when Jordan was really, he might have still been in the hospital at this point, January of 13. They were out there 17th, they were out there in the home on the 23rd. Talked with her, and I didn't put all the conversations in here because there'd be so many. They went to the home when Jordan was young, and I'll just get through these as quick as I can, but you'll see how often they were out there. And these are social workers going out there. Can you skip to the end slide of 2013? We'll get through some of the notes during the trial. Over 30 visits to the home and over 40 total contacts or attempts to contact throughout 2013. Nancy Carabello mentions Jordan in one note. Well, she was visiting his enrolled siblings. From 2013 to 17, approximately 100 visits or attempted visits by DCFS. What else did they do? They don't just go to the home. DCFS has powers. They worked with the Cleveland Police Department, Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority. They went to schools and got records. They went to counselors and got Larissa's counseling records. They got medical records. They could speak with doctors. They run reports. They talked with Help Me Grow of Cuyahoga County. Nancy Carabello talked with them. They talked with her about the family. Here's, I thought was an interesting note. DCFS found out that Larissa was cashing the Social Security check for Jordan and giving it to one of the fathers of the kids, Anthony. Money intended for the care of the children was being used for alcohol. DCFS says, well, she can still meet the needs of the children, so no big deal. Why didn't you hear anything about early intervention or DCFS in the earlier today? Why weren't you told the whole story? This is one of the DCFS workers who testified that you can't rule out that from December 21st until you close this out in February, that Jordan Rodriguez was in that house but suffering through visible physical injuries. No. But somehow that's okay. This now is getting into the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and I'll get through these quick. You know, what's Larissa say to them? Attempts were made to re-enroll Jordan and help me grow, and it was unsuccessful. Not true. Cleveland Metropolitan School District evaluates Jordan. Despite everything going on in her lives, he's actually starting to do pretty well. Occupational therapist, 2 psychologists, physical therapist, intervention specialist, speech and language pathologist, and nurse. No signs or symptoms of abuse, neglect, or malnourishment. He was eligible to attend public school until she decided to withdraw. September 16, and that's when she started to tell people, he's not here, he moved away. Mental health. I think I heard this morning that somehow there's no duty of physicians and nurses and people to report what was going on with him. Look, I don't think anybody should be blamed other than Chris and Larissa. If you look at what they did, especially that last couple months, it was absolutely monstrous what they did. But if you know a young child who has kidney problems and developmental disabilities is missing appointments for a year or more, there is a duty for you to call when you're a doctor. And there's notes throughout. Because if you could go to the end of this one. 13 contacts or stays in 2013.
I'm sorry, one more time.
13 contacts or stays in 2013. And then look at this. All these attempts that they're trying to get the mom in 2017. April of 17, April of 17, May of 17, July of 17. He had been missing appointments for years, and they knew he needed help. If you're going to look at everybody in this, then fine. Then look at everybody. Look at everybody, though. You don't tell somebody a third of the story. Metro Health realizes he hasn't been seen in well over a year. They don't do anything. And this is another DCFS worker, and she testifies, you would expect a mandatory reporter physician who knows that the child is continuing to be behind in medical care to call and let you know. Yes. We do have some experts, and we have some highly qualified experts. Lisa Pavlovic is a medical director of the Yale Child Abuse Clinic, and she will talk to you about Metro Health's rules. I'm not going to come in here, and I don't want to come in here and blame other people. I think Chris and Larissa are responsible for this. But it's not fair to get up here and tell you this much of the story. If you're going to try to blame other people, then let's look at everybody who was involved in this child's life. Pamela Miller, Master of Social Work, licensed social worker, senior policy analyst for APSEC, and if any of you have heard that, it's a highly, highly recognized organization. And she'll talk to you about Metro Health and DCFS. And Parent Educator Program was not obligated to provide social work. In fact, they weren't staffed for it. That wasn't it. Cuyahoga County decides where he goes. Total of 156 contacts were made between 2013 and 2017, but you didn't hear about those in the opening statement. You heard about somebody making a note that they saw one of the children who was not enrolled in the program. Ken Harshbarger, he will testify. By the way, though, he never said that you're not going to see radiographic evidence of malnutrition on film. You probably will. I don't know where that 90% figure came out, but it's never been disclosed any time in this case. But the fight isn't about whether it was lack of food, starvation, malnutrition, abuse with all the broken bones. I mean, quite frankly, Jordan gave up. Do you blame him with what was happening to him in those last months? Larissa says he just stopped eating. This is one of the saddest cases you can ever think about. And unfortunately, you might have to look at some of the autopsy photos. You are going to be taken aback, but you may never have been taken aback before. I'm not going to go through all these either, but there are so many notes of food in the home. I'm just flipping through these. You will see these during the trial. And these are from DCFS, who investigates this. I'll go back there. We have December 16 and January 17. Bright Beginnings talks about food in the house. These are the last three. The DCFS was there. And everybody testified that she could have enough food. This was from one of her good friends. They go to the food pantry. She knew the food pantry. She went to them all the time. I take her to the food pantries once a month. If she ran short on food, we'd go to the food pantry. I never saw any of the children go hungry or look malnourished. Her sister, Michelle, Larissa used the food pantry when she needed food. I personally took her there many times. Early Saturday morning, we would go to 2 to 3 pantries in a row. She was never turned away. Michelle, by the way, who I heard saw him in December of 16. I don't know when she last saw him. I know that when she had her deposition taken and swore to tell the truth, she said he was only 2 the last time she saw him. She had not been to the home for that long. Anna Rodriguez, another sister, we'd all go to the food pantries together. Larissa herself, after this happened, none of my children who were living with me after Jordan's death were malnourished.
I sat there, I didn't know.
Here is an interview at the police station.
I sat there,
We're almost done.
I didn't know what to do. And I can't sit there and put on the blood in my foot. He told me to call. What? Chris. He told me that we should call it and my thing was I wasn't ready to be kids. I just wanted to sit there with Jordan. He died in my arms. And it was very, I didn't know what to do. So it was a message that we buried. That we buried him, but I wanted to bury him close to home. So he could be with me.
Maybe if you picked up the phone, you would have died. Maybe if you didn't tell your boyfriend to dig a grave outside rather than taking you to the hospital, he would have died.
Do you have a child with special needs?
No.
I'm not going to replay that. This is another one.
No, I mean, as he got older, not really. Maybe like once a year to see the kidney doctor. But it wasn't because with the respiratory, it got a little more.
You know, she's even lying again saying she still took them. I apologize. Even there, she's lying about taking Jordan to the doctor. She wasn't taking him to the kidney doctor. Involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, endangering children, gross abuse of a corpse, 25 years in prison. If it was me, I would have given her 1,000. If it was my wife, she probably would have given her 2,000. And Chris Rodriguez, this is when it started happening. Chris Rodriguez, the fall of 2016, things are good. We see in May that he's very nourished. After the fall of 2016, I don't know when it started happening. We know in January of 17 there was still food in the house and DCFS was there. And the other kids looked good. They didn't look for Jordan. Something was going on with Chris. He got 28 years. I'd give him 28,000 years. This is unbelievable what they did. And to let them sit there in prison and think it's somebody else's fault is not something that should happen. don't know what can be said about Jordan. Nobody deserves a life like this. Nobody. But put the blame where the blame is due. Thank you.
Jurors, I'm going to ask you, we didn't go as long as I thought, but do you want a bathroom break now, or do you want to continue? Does anybody want a bathroom break? Raise your hand. Do any of the attorneys need a brief recess?
Yes, please.
Okay. Then we'll keep it brief. If somebody has to go to the bathroom, I'm not going to deny them that. We'll keep it to 10 minutes, please. So remember my admonition? Don't talk to each other or anybody else. Do not form an opinion. Standard admonition I'll be giving you for day 4 now. Let's all rise to the jury. We're just going to take a 10-minute break, Andy.
We're going to start hearing witnesses in this. We've just wrapped up the defense's opening statements. This is a horrific case, to say the least. But when it comes down to it, and I want you to put yourself in the juror's shoes, who was at fault? And you even heard the defense attorney there say, if you are, at the end of this, you are going to have to place who is the most at fault, who played a part in this, and who's the least at fault. You have the case of little Jordan Rodriguez. He was, as we saw on the screen, born with several strikes against him. He was born early. He was born without a kidney. He was developmentally disabled. He was nonverbal. And because of all of that, he had been assigned a caseworker by the name of Nancy Caraballo, and she worked on behalf of Catholic Charities. Now, Catholic Charities is a nonprofit organization, and they do not have the powers of a child and family services. So we heard the defense, and I think he did a very good job of laying out Nancy Caraballo. While yes, she was buying food stamps for less than what she was convicted or pleaded guilty to food stamp fraud. And if you're on the jury, you'll have to ask if that played a part in this. We know that when the 5-year-old died, when Jordan died, at 5 years old, they believe he weighed just 15 pounds. That's going to play a role in this. But you heard the defense show reports from Child and Family Services that in the 156 different times that officers, Child and Family Services, had shown up over the course of, I believe it was a 3-year span, all the reports said there was ample food in the home. So to try and blame Catholic Charities, whose worker, Nancy Caraballo, had been buying food stamps, is that a good thing? The defense said no, that's a terrible thing, and she's serving 3 years in prison for that. But it's not what killed Jordan Rodriguez, and that is the argument here, is who played a role. And I thought the defense did a great job of making it clear to the jury as an employee, and her exact title is she's a parent educator. She is there to help the parent we heard everything from nutrition for the parent. How does the parent find time to work out when you have children? How do you teach a child to stop sucking their thumb? She was there as a parent educator. Now, she has the duty to report, much like anybody does, a doctor, a police, a firefighter. You have the duty to report when you see abuse or possible abuse. So she has that duty. But when she was there as a parent educator, you heard the defense say she in no way has any authority to say, I need to see the child. That's something that Child and Family Services can do. They are there to report on the child itself. She is there to help the parents learn how to deal with a child with disabilities, with medical issues, like being born with just one kidney. And so to blame, according to the defense, Catholic Charities, that their employees should have seen the malnourishment and the treatment of Jordan and the injuries that he was sustaining on behalf of the parents who were not sure, but we know he was not only malnourished when his body was exhumed. And again, we heard the defense say these pictures that are going to be shown to the jury are going to be very, very graphic of autopsy because of how long he had been buried. This is the first time I had heard that not only did they bury the child in the backyard, they dug up a dog, a dead dog, to bury on top of the child in the backyard, perhaps to throw off any investigation. If somebody did come back and start digging, they would have found the bones of the dog and maybe not continued to dig and find the 5-year-old. Just absolutely disturbing on so many levels. That's the first time we had heard that detail. Remember, this did not go to trial. The mom and the boyfriend took plea deals, serving 25 and 28 years in prison. Carafalo for her role in stealing food stamps or purchasing food stamps for pennies on the dollar or whatever she paid. She's serving 3 years in all of this. But again, this comes down to who was at fault. The defense just tried to tell the jury the only two people at fault here are the mom and the boyfriend, Larissa or Larissa. We heard it's been pronounced both ways in court. And Jordan Rodriguez, the boyfriend who was digging the grave before the child was even dead. The child laying on a bed upstairs, dying, half dead. And we hear that the boyfriend Christopher Rodriguez had already been out in the backyard digging a deep hole for his grave. And so that was the defense painting a very gruesome picture for the jury to say that there are only two people at fault here, and that is Larissa and Christopher. I'm going to play you our story again that we had to cut off from Mike Mason, who was able to talk to the attorney that is representing the little boy's family. This is Jordan's estate is who has filed this lawsuit, a Michelle Rodriguez. We even heard from the defense say that Michelle Rodriguez claimed that the last time she had seen the child was when she was 2. So that was basically the defense saying, look, this is, and you have to be careful when you're the defense in a case like this, when you have a jury, you can't make the family look too bad. You can't make the person filing the lawsuit look too bad. But that was basically saying, look, if you cared so much about this child, and when you're being deposed by the police, you say the last time you saw him was when he was 2, then why all of a sudden do you care enough to file a lawsuit and try and get money from Catholic Charities? I thought the defense did a very crafty job of trying to make that argument without attacking Michelle Rodriguez, who is the executor for the state for Jordan Rodriguez. Again, Mike Mason set up all of this. He talked to the attorney that represents Michelle, that's presenting in this case. So let's listen to Mike Mason's story to give you a little bit of background here.
5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez was a vulnerable boy who clearly needed help. Reports show he was not only physically abused, but he was malnourished, only weighing 15 pounds at the time of his death. He was also nonverbal. Now the attorney representing his estate hopes this trial will speak out on his behalf, sending a strong message to Catholic Charities.
Jury selection began in the wrongful death trial filed against Jordan's mother, Larissa Rodriguez, her boyfriend, and Nancy Caraballo. Caraballo is the Catholic Charity social worker who was hired to do welfare checks on Jordan.
Catholic Charities had a contract to provide services to that family.
Attorney J. Paul Deritani represents Jordan's estate. 5 years ago, he filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which is now going to trial. This all stems from a horrific case of abuse back in 2017. Deritani says there were at least 13 cases of abuse and neglect involving Jordan that Catholic Charities and Caraballo should have known about. He says Caraballo failed to do her job. According to reports, Rodriguez and her boyfriend were abusing Jordan so badly that he became unconscious and eventually died.
Multiple fractured ribs and a fractured wrist. So, that's pretty big evidence that there was abuse going on in that home. And for them not to be in the home, because I believe had they been in the home, they would have seen evidence of abuse and certainly evidence of starvation.
Investigators say the couple then stuffed Jordan's little body into garbage bags and buried him in the backyard of their Cleveland home. The couple pled guilty to charges of manslaughter, felonious assault, and abuse of a corpse. They're both serving prison sentences of at least 25 years. Plus, investigators say Caraballo was involved in a scheme to buy food stamps from Jordan's mother illegally. They say she also falsified reports claiming she did welfare checks on Jordan, even though she didn't. Caraballo pled guilty to those charges. Diratani hopes jurors will send a strong message to Catholic Charities.
I hope what this case does is send a signal that Catholic Charities needs to clean up their act, and they need to hopefully restructure things so that other children don't get hurt.
The trial could last 2 or 3 weeks, but Diratani says he thinks it'll be wrapped up sooner than that. We'll, of course, let you know. Reporting from the Justice Center, Mike Mason, 19 News.
And we are still waiting for the jury to come back from their 10-minute restroom break. We're keeping an eye on that. But again, you heard in Mike's report, and assuming he got that from the attorney that's representing the family, of course, he's going to try and get the viewers. And keep in mind, after the judge saw that the attorney did that interview with our Mike Mason, the judge put a gag order on both the defense and the family, the attorney for the family that filed the lawsuit, because doesn't want this talked about in the media. Judge was clearly not happy the attorney did that interview. There was a point made in Mike's story there that said she had falsified reports that she was there, that she was supposed to file after checking on Jordan. You heard the defense say that was not her job. Her job was not there to check on Jordan. Her job, being employed by Catholic Charities, her job was as a parent educator. Her job was to meet with Larissa on how to help with a special needs child. You heard the defense say she had no right to go in the home and look for the child. Some of these meetings, you heard the defense say, could take place in a park, could take place outside the home, and it could take place with just the parent. So I thought very strong argument for the defense that her job is not the same job as Child Protective Family Services. Notice they are not being sued. I do not believe you can even sue a state agency like Child and Family Services. That's why they're going after the only other people that had a stake in this, somebody that had a case with this family, and that is Catholic Charities. You look at this little boy and the details that we're hearing, that they had stuffed a sock in his mouth there before they put him in black trash bags and buried him. Once they buried him, they dug up a dead dog to place on top of his body. That would perhaps, if their mentality was to throw off investigators, if they dug up that spot, they would find the dead dog before they would find the child's body and perhaps not go on digging. Just very devious. And you heard the defense say there are two people to blame here. It was Larissa and Christopher, and to not let them off the hook, to not let them sit in prison. And if they were to find that the Catholic Charities played a role in this, that would somehow give Larissa and Christopher peace of mind sitting in prison, that, well, they weren't entirely to blame for this. And he said that would let them off the hook. Dan DeRosa with 19 News. If you're just joining us, we are waiting for the continuation of the trial into the lawsuit, the wrongful death lawsuit of 5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez. This happened back in 2017. That's when the body was finally discovered. His mother, Larissa Rodriguez, had been telling family members, had been telling Child and Family Services. They even played body cam video from police officers asking where the little boy with special needs was. And she said he was living with his father in Texas, that he went to visit his father in Texas. They asked for phone numbers, they asked for information. We found out when this case broke open that was clearly a lie. and that every phone number, every name she gave to investigators was a dead end. And that's why the circle sort of closed in on her home and on Larissa. They had not seen the child. Family had not seen the child in a couple of years. I can remember when this story broke and we had reporters out there at the scene that day. You had family members who were irate. They were screaming on live television that they knew that the mother had done something and they had been asking for help for some time. And so that leads us to this position. Child and Family Services, if you want to say that they clearly failed somewhere in this, that they should have been keeping closer tabs, and when they showed up and were told the child was in Texas, that they should have pushed harder, that's one thing. That's not who's on trial here. This is not a civil lawsuit against Child and Family Services. You cannot sue a state agency, but they can go after the only other people who had a case open for this family, and that is Catholic Charities Corporation. That is an individual group that had been assigned to this. They were hired, presumably by the state, to get some services for the family. But let's remember, this person who was hired, Nancy Caraballo, she was not hired as a child psychologist. She was not hired as a caseworker for Jordan. She was hired as a parent educator to help the mom of a special needs, of a medically disabled child, on how she is to handle that situation. Everything from how do you get a child to stop sucking their thumb? How do you find time to work out while you have young children? What is the best nutrition policies for your kids? So to say, why didn't Nancy Caraballo from Catholic Services, Catholic Charities, why was she not looking at the child? Why could she not see that he was malnourished? You had the defense say that's not her job. She has no legal authority to say, I demand to see the child. If she showed up to meet with Larissa and the child was there, she made a note about Jordan. She made a note about the other kids in the family. But on the times she showed up and she was lied to that the child was in Texas, she has no authority to say, what's that phone number? Or I'm going to find him, or I'm going to work with the family in Texas. That's not her job. And so it'll be very interesting to see how the attorney for the family, for the estate of Jordan, how they play this out. How do you show that Catholic Charities should have gone beyond their scope and beyond their legal authority to know the condition of Jordan Rodriguez here? Again, we're waiting to get our shot back in court. We're past our 10-minute break. Sometimes these go a little longer, but stay with us. As soon as we get our camera, as soon as we get our coverage back in court, we will continue this trial, presumably with the first witness being called by the family for Jordan Rodriguez. Dan DeRosa with 19 News. As we wait for court to resume, our camera shot not back up yet, which tells me this 10-minute bathroom break has either been stretched by the judge or perhaps they may be dealing with a situation where if we're about to get our first witness, perhaps the witness is not arrived yet. Not sure how long they expected. You heard the judge say to the jury that the opening argument for the defense didn't last as long as he thought. The judge wanted to roll right on, but you heard the attorneys ask for a recess. So sometimes if you're an attorney in a case like this, you tell your first witnesses, oh, maybe you don't have to be here today, or don't show up until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. That would be the earliest we would need you. So that may be the situation we are dealing with. We will wait to hear from court. But again, if you're just tuning in, this is a story that most Clevelanders will remember just because of how horrific the details were back in 2017 when the body was discovered in the backyard, buried. of his mother's home. That is 5-year-old on the screen, 5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez. He was born extremely premature. He was born without a kidney. He was also born with developmental disabilities. He was nonverbal. It appears, and the mother has already pleaded guilty to 25 years in prison. The boyfriend guilty. He's serving 28 years in prison for their role in this. It appears that little Jordan had been malnourished quite severely, left to die in an upstairs bedroom. They stuffed socks in his mouth, put him in a black trash bag, buried him in the backyard. Again, new details learned today in court that they had dug up a dead dog from somewhere else in the backyard and put that dead dog on top of the grave or shallow grave, perhaps to throw off investigators. And now the question is, who is at fault? This is a wrongful death civil lawsuit. This is about money for the estate of Jordan Rodriguez. And when you look at everyone who was involved in this child's young life, you have everyone from Metro Health Hospital that was dealing with a child born with just one kidney. You had police that were involved for searches and for welfare checks to the home. You had Child and Family Services that were involved, but notice none of those three are in this lawsuit. They are not named. Those are entities that you cannot sue. You cannot sue Child and Family Services. It is a state agency. And you had one more agency that had a case with this family, and that is the Catholic Charities Corporation, nonprofit. They are not a state organization. They had been hired to work with the mother because of this child's disabilities. His disabilities were quite severe, and she was there as a parent educator. Very clear delineation, according to the defense, that he wants the jury to remember. They had only been hired to work with the mom on how to be a better parent. That person was not there to check on Jordan, to make sure that he was being fed, to look at him, but had that caseworker seen Jordan in a bad position, that she would have been obligated to report that to authorities, much like doctors are obligated to report that to the police. But she had never seen the child in a bad state. The notes that she had from visits, the child was doing well, was playing with the other children in that family. And remember, according to the defense, she is not obligated to search for that child. So on the visits that she showed up to do parent education, if little Jordan Rodriguez wasn't around, she had no authority to demand her to show her Jordan. She had no authority to search the house, and she had no authority to take the child if she thought the child was being abused. Those are all powers that belong to Child and Family Services, who are not being sued here.
A 5-year-old developmentally disabled boy was discovered buried in the backyard of his Cleveland home, and a wrongful death trial resulted in a verdict. Previously, the man's brother, who acknowledged burying the boy in his backyard, described to jurors graphic details of his conversations with his brother, pleading with him to come forward. Attorneys representing Michelle Rodriguez, the administrator of Jordan Rodriguez's estate, are suing Catholic Charities Corporation on the grounds that caseworkers hired to protect Jordan were negligent in their duties. The case is based on an incident that occurred back in 2017. The assigned caseworker, Nancy Caraballo, is accused by investigators of falsifying reports to indicate that she visited the Rodriguez home on welfare when, in reality, she did not. The jury gave Jordan Rodriguez's estate a minimum of $12 million in compensatory damages. Next week, the court will reconvene to decide whether or not to grant punitive damages in this particular case, which could result in Jordan's estate receiving additional funds. All of the defendants, including Larissa, Chris, Nancy, and the Catholic Charities, as well as Metro Health and Cuyahoga County's Department of Children and Family Services, who were not parties to the lawsuit, will split the $12 million that was granted today. The jury divided it up according to the proportion of blame they thought each individual or organization had for Jordan's demise. The estate's lawyer states that the breakdown by individual or agency is as follows: 52% Larissa Rodriguez, $6.24 million, 15% Department of Child and Family Services, $1.8 million, 12% Christopher Rodriguez, $1.44 million, 11% MetroHealth, $1.32 million, 8% Catholic Charities, $960,000, 2% Nancy Carballo, $240,000. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and press the notification bell. Additionally, you can view our playlists and most recent videos. Thank you for watching.